if you look at the area, there are bilateral and trilateral disputes among ASEAN members over maritime boundary demarcation. There are also bilateral and multilateral disputes among ASEAN members and China over sovereignty and sovereign rights and jurisdiction based on exclusive economic zone. So the tension over disputed area, the South China Sea, time and again have been heightened also by unbridled nationalism and by the great power rivalries and competition between the United States and China in the Indo-Pacific region. No wonder why from time to time it sparks friction between claimant countries. The recent incident involving Philippines and China in the South China Sea, where 3 Chinese Coast Guard vessels had fired water cannons on 2 Philippine boats delivering supplies to the Philippine Maritime Station in Ayungin Shoal, is just one of the many skirmishes between and among claimant states since time immemorial. On the recent unfortunate incident in the Ayungin Shoal, the filing of diplomatic protests against China is a justified and legitimate action on the part of the Philippine government. By the way, Ayungin Shoal in international language is actually called the Second Thomas Shoal. However, it is one thing to file a diplomatic protest against China over the recent incident in the South China Sea involving the 2 countries. It is another to blow out of proportion the incident by involving the United States, which is not even a party to the dispute. The US is not even a party to UNCLOS or the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas. Such pronouncement was for me unnecessary and uncalled for on the part of the Secretary of Foreign Affairs to cite the lopsided and more skewed mutual defense treaty between the Philippines and the US. I have even more questions right now in my mind, no? What was that for? Why was Locsin trying? What was Locsin trying to insinuate and achieve? Is it to scare China? That's quite funny, because as we know, China is a superpower already, no? And or the other question is it to resurrect the so-called China threat theory? That's even far-fetched, given that China is the country's #1 trading partner, #1 import source, the #2 export market, a major foreign investor, and the second largest source of tourists of the Philippines. It is also the #1 supplier of COVID-19 vaccines in the country. Take note, out of the 97.67 million doses that have delivered to the Philippines since February of this year, 44.5 million were Sinovac, aside from the fact that we also received around 1 million, I think, donation of Sinopharm from the People's Republic of China. No? Likewise, China was instrumental in the successful launch of the national vaccination program in the Philippines in March of this year. Given all this, do you really think that China is a threat to this country? For me, of course not. No, that's a logical conclusion. Moreover, the most imperative and the relevant question, I think, is why is it that there's no investigation on what happened and why the Chinese Coast Guard was provoked to use water cannon against the Philippine vessels in charge of resupplying the Marines in the Sierra Madre? Another question in my mind as well is why the Philippine vessels were unusually covered with tarpaulins, that the Chinese suspected that they were carrying materials to repair the vessels or even construction material to build some kind of facility on the shoal. This statement or this information was reflected in the latest article of Ambassador Bobby Tiglao, and even in the latest article as well of Mr. Herman Laurel, no, or Camentong. So those are the questions, no. So I think there's more to it, no. On another note, just want to clarify as well that the tribunal, the 26th arbitral ruling, did not denote the victory of sovereignty or ownership in the Marines or over the South China Sea. It just clarifies certain things, like, for example, what is the maritime entitlements of the Philippines in the West Philippine Sea, declared the non-dash line of China as being without basis, but there's no such thing as trying to say na we own or there's the territorial sovereignty dispute was already resolved. That's not the case. And also, we have to remember as well that when you talk about the Second Thomas Shoal, the tribunal did not rule that the Thomas Shoal is ours. It's actually within our EEZ, which is 200 nautical miles. But so in a way, we have what you call sovereign rights. However, the more complicated thing is the tribunal declined to consider the Ayungin Shoal or the Second Thomas Shoal because it was a military matter. And thus far, not within the scope of UNCLOS. So for me, how to resolve this issue? For me, we need to work on the COC, or the Code of Conduct of the South China Sea. The COC is not a mechanism that will settle sovereign disputes, but it will provide us guidelines and rules on how countries or claimant state would conduct their affairs in the South China Sea. Also, I think the Philippines must make a conscious effort to decide which is much more important, to have mutually beneficial or pragmatic cooperation, or to be used by an external power to have a confrontation with China on sovereignty issue. I think that's something that we have to think about. So without a doubt, for me, still at the end of the day, we should pursue and we should resolve our differences with China or with any other claimant state in the South China Sea through diplomacy negotiation. At the end of the day, diplomacy is still the potent force, and we should resolve it in a peaceful way.
So with this incident, it is very imperative for the Philippines and China to go back to the negotiating table in order to overcome their misunderstanding on the South China Sea. Both parties need to be reminded of their gains in the bilateral consultative mechanism in the South China Sea, were they committed to promote pragmatic cooperation in order to sustain their friendship, pursue common prosperity, and achieve overall peace in the South China Sea. So instead of conducting their own unilateral actions to assert their respective positions, I think both countries need to work together in order to encourage coordinated actions and joint management and even development of natural resources in the South China Sea. And I don't have time to discuss anymore the gains that we had in the bilateral consultative mechanism in the South China Sea. But in the sixth bilateral consultative mechanism in the South China Sea, they decided not only to talk, but also to work together. They even created working groups, working groups in order to pursue cooperation in the area of marine environmental protection, marine environmental research, joint development of natural resources and gas, and even coordinated law enforcement operation. For the past 5 years, the BCM has achieved a lot in terms of promoting pragmatic cooperation between the two countries within the principle of the duty to cooperate, which is even mandated by the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. In other words, the Philippines and China through the BCM have gone a long way to build confidence, promote common understanding, and pursue pragmatic cooperation in the South China Sea. And the recent Second Thomas Shoal Incident, if not handled amicably by both parties, can destroy overnight all their efforts to strengthen their bilateral ties needed for actual cooperation to occur. It is therefore essential for both parties to avoid doing unilateral actions that can undermine their bilateral efforts to pursue maritime cooperation in the South China Sea and promote good ocean governance of the South China Sea. There's a need for the Philippines and China to establish another mechanism that can promote closer coordination on the ground in order to avoid incidents that have the potential of damaging their overall bilateral ties. More importantly, the Philippines and China should be reminded that while both countries are independent republics with their own national interests, they also have bilateral commitment to pursue comprehensive strategic cooperation in order to advance their mutual interests, their shared interests. Thus, the Philippines and China should overcome their misunderstanding on the recent Second Thomas Shoal Incident and deliberately work together rather than against each other through a strategic bilateral partnership in order to fulfill their common aspiration to make the South China Sea a shared home where nations can enjoy a community of peace, friendship, and cooperation. That's all for now, and I will discuss more during the open forum.